If you want to better understand what's going on with healthcare, Digital Health Review is the podcast that brings relevancy into the health technology conversation. Digital Health Review presents stories of health equity and technology, as well as actionable advice and news at the intersection of digital health, public health, and health equity. I'm Blair Hurst, your resident Black health tech nerd and host. This episode, we learn all about Sextech, and what a pleasure it was to speak with Lex Gillion, who is the CEO of Modality Group, a Sextech intelligence firm unearthing insights around consumer pleasure. By building the data infrastructure the industry needs, Modality is giving the sex product industry the tools to innovate. Prior to founding Modality, Lex lived in Asia for almost 7 years. She is currently based in Berlin, Germany, where she splits her time between running Modality and working at blockchain infrastructure company Parity Technologies. Let's get started. Hey,
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. A bit sleepy, but can't complain.
Yeah, tell me about you. Where are you right now? You're not in New York. You said you went back to your mom's.
Yeah, I went to Atlanta. It's my mom's birthday, so I was surprising everybody. And my sister's birthday's tomorrow, so I'm just like driving by.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's nice. Oh, they have back to backs. Interesting. Okay. All
yeah, it's
right.
wild.
That's awesome. Yeah. What's your sign, by the way?
I'm a Leo.
Ah, okay. Cool. 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 Cool.
Yeah, on the
Thanks
on
for
the
doing
cusp.
this. I appreciate your time. I really do. I know you're like in the middle of traveling and busy and all of that, but I
Oh
really
no, it's
appreciate it.
exciting.
Yeah. So I have a podcast. I don't know if you've listened to any of the episodes. Um, the podcast is, I'm speaking to a whole host of folks, founders, tech investors, folks that work in digital health, obviously, but also folks that work in, health equity and research. Because the business that I'm trying to build is trying to solve for creating more equitable digital health tools in the
Hmm.
marketplace. And one of the things that has been coming up a lot, or I'm starting to read a little bit about, is like sex tech. And
Yeah.
so I had a light bulb that like popped in my head. I was like, I don't know too much about it. I'm, doing my thing, I'm researching about it. I was like, let me just talk to Lex.
Like
We
easy.
can just have a great conversation about it, and we'll record it and we'll share the knowledge. So first of all, thanks so much for doing this with me. I don't know too much, and so I kind of want to start from the beginning. Like, what is sex tech? And I know that you've also founded and are running Modality Group. So
Right.
tell me a little bit about what Modality Group is solving for also.
Sure. So in a way, sex tech is an umbrella term for all things sexual health. It was created by the term itself was created by Cindy Gallup, because we had fintech and we had medtech and they all had legitimacy, but sexual health and sexual products weren't getting the same level of uh, credence, I guess, or like same level of just like, respect. And so sex tech, the term was created. So as it sits today, it more or less encompasses anything sex or sexuality powered by technology or deep tech itself. Um, and Modality Group was created because a lot of these technologies and products were created without being digitally driven. So flashback. I was in Hong Kong in, I think it was like 2016. I always get the dates wrong on this. There was this trade show called the Asia Adult Expo. And I was sitting in the audience watching this VR pornography company talk about how they were the future of sexuality. Um, and everything was like from a cis male gaze and not really so interesting for me. And I asked him, I'm like, yo, how do you make your products? How do you form, build this, the new offerings? And he basically was like, my imagination, and I think about what's possible. I'm like, wait, what? And then fast forward, maybe like a few months, maybe even a year, I forget. But I was at Tango, which is a male pleasure company, and they said something very similar to me, that they create products more or less by trial and error from their own bodies, and that's not scalable, right? Like sex will sell because sex will sell, but what if we're not satisfying all the needs that people have? What if we're not thinking about, how people from different cultural backgrounds, from different religious backgrounds, from different ethnic backgrounds relate to sex and sexuality and pleasure more broadly, um, and we're not creating products for them?
I love that. I love that. And I feel like I'm surprised that that was the sort of like business model of those groups of companies. So I'm a little lost for words. But I definitely see how you were able to pull a big gap from there and build Modality Group to help solve for that. And it's great. So now I also have a better understanding of like, what sex tech is or how it's defined. Um, and I'm interested, can you share a little bit about like what is the history of sex technology and like where are we today? I am looking at products in the market, looking at companies, their founders, etc. And a lot of them are women. We can talk about Dame products, for example, which
Mhm.
we have on the digital health review marketplace, is something that is out there and underneath the sex tech or sexual health technology umbrella. But can you give me a fuller picture of your perspective of, the history of sexual health technology and where are we today in 2022 with digital sexual health?
Mm. It's a great question, actually. So, I mean, where to start? So let's go back. I'm not sure how far back to go, but let's say roughly between like 1960 to let's say 2005. We had sex products and sex toys were actually created mostly by cis men for cis women and for themselves. And so think more like of these back alley kind of shops that are a bit taboo, very latex and like plasticky kind of, bright pink vibrators, like, in the plastic. When you were a kid, like, you got like a yo-yo for Christmas, and it was in that plastic that you had to cut open with
Like
like
a huge
garden shears. Like, it's like that genre. And that's problematic, because you have sex toys being designed by cis men for women, as well as themselves. Then we kind of shifted into like what I call phase two, which is women's liberation, kind of feminist inclusion. And I loosely bracket this between 2005 to maybe 2000, like 17, 18. Um, and these are not like hard historical numbers, but it's just how I frame it in my head. Uh, so in this kind of women's liberation movement, you had products more or less designed by white women for everybody with a vulva. And it's like girl power, bridging the pleasure gap, and a lot of these like, you know, embrace your sexuality, embrace your pleasure, because a cis man is not going to give you an orgasm. Very orgasm focused, very she comes first, slogans. Um, and then if we move to where we kind of are now, I would put it like 2017, 2018 to today. Now everyone else is being included. So we're having a lot more products and services for people who are non-binary. We're seeing diversity in the service providers, including Black men, Black women, Black trans folks, Asian trans folks, like all kinds of folks are in this space now, designing for disabilities. And right now, we're really seeing a lot more inclusion, which means we're going to get a lot more innovation going forward than just, your run of the mill vibrator. People who are really thinking about issues like I have dexterity issues and I can't physically grip an electronic product in my hand. How do I use a toy to receive pleasure? Or I need something that's more sensual and is focusing on scent and smell. What do I use? Where do I go? So we're getting a lot more diversity. Not only in the look and feel of the founders, but also in the look and feel of the innovations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love also that consideration too, because that's moving into the health equity space, right? You're thinking about
Mm,
different disabled bodies. So, my background's in clinical research in part, and
yeah,
cancer oncology, and folks who may have um, uh, RA, for example, or who may have neuropathy from their treatment, they're not able to use their body or their hands um, in ways that others may be able to. So I love that now is becoming part of not just the conversation, but like the original design and build of tools. And it reminds
yeah.
me, I'm sure you've heard this, of the Gracie and Frankie. I think that's what it's called, the TV show, and how their punter joke on these older women who are starting a sex tech company, essentially, right? A sexual
Yeah,
health company, which I absolutely love. But in that, it's sort of brought up a lot, right? They had trouble getting a loan to start their business for several reasons, and
yeah,
sort of a taboo conversation. And so I can imagine that there are probably more barriers in building in this industry or this market than you would say other digital health markets.
yeah.
Um,
So
then
many.
you can kind of be tied into, femtech, for example, which I've seen sex tech kind of like slid underneath fintech as like a subcategory of it. Um, you know what I mean? But they also, those who are building in the femtech market are also having trouble for a variety of other misconceptions.
Yeah,
And so I'm curious, like, because you've been doing this for so long, because you have a very like deep understanding of the market and the history and what's happening, like, what have you seen has been like the biggest misconception about sex tech in the wellness industry? Because there is bias even with folks who are in healthcare and who are in digital health. Like, what are you seeing?
I mean, I think you brought up some points that were like almost twofold, right? Like not just about misconceptions, but about barriers that come from these misconceptions. Like there are some barriers, like I'll start with the barriers. Barriers we can't get money, like that's really quite difficult. Um, we can't necessarily use the same payment gateways as other companies. So like things like Stripe or things like these like things things that help you get paid. A lot of the infrastructure is blocked from blocked from us. I don't know the right phrase, but we can't get it. And then you also have things like advertising. We can't advertise on Facebook. Um, Accounts get shadow banned in the middle. Like you'll have a following of a few thousand, and your whole account will just disappear on Instagram. Or you try to run an ad campaign on Facebook, and it's like shut down, even if you're being super, above board. So that is it makes our businesses harder to run. We have to get more creative in building our infrastructure. And I think like that does come from a series of misconceptions. I think that people think that sex is still taboo, and I don't know why. And I don't understand actually what the misconception actually is in that way. Um, yeah, I really don't know because like you look at these products, right? And it's sex ed or it's like health and wellness. or it's like even the pleasure companies are super sanitized now in order to try to navigate these barriers. So I'm not really seeing what is confusing, if I'm being completely honest. Um, but I do think that people think that it might be a gateway to some kind of trafficking situation, or it's a gateway to child pornography, or it's some kind of gateway to other very taboo things that we don't want to happen, and nobody wants them to happen. So I do think the world needs to catch up a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting because, you know, if the industry has adapted to the market to sanitize itself down, if it's, you know, attacking it at already self-approved angles of sexual education and wellness, one would think that maybe the barriers to entry should be a little bit lower. Um, and to that point, you know, from a product builder standpoint, you know, I kind of, in an engineering standpoint, am impressed about how these companies then are built because their infrastructure has to look completely different, is a little bit stricter than other builders. You know, it's very unfortunate. The nerd in me is kind of like, oh, well, that's kind of also a cool problem to solve, right?
I know. That's where I'm at too. I'm like, oh, how do we build the rail? I'm like, oh, interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's sort of like if I was, you know, if I was an investor, I want to pick the brains of everyone who's building in that market because I'd want to understand like how are they still building their following given the fact that because at that point you've reached another level of engagement. You know, that
Hmm.
level of engagement compared to other companies, I would say would probably double because you know that you've had to go through great lengths to reach that audience, and that audience has to be in a certain mindset to receive that, but also
Hmm.
have to support that. So like that level of engagement, I would say, is probably 2x of what you would compare to any other digital health company out there. Um, so I think that's like extremely fascinating, and I think one thing that I've read and have seen you as you've been growing Modality Group is that you're trying to build this in the world of Web3, right? Yeah,
Yeah. Oh
yeah,
gosh.
I'm gonna ask you about it. So, building Modality Group to fit into Web3. What are your thoughts about that?
You know, the short answer is I don't know yet. So, I actually took a second job project working at a Web3 infrastructure company. So we build like blockchain infrastructure for different projects to build on top of, and I'm rapidly trying to educate myself. But I can see the potential of blockchain technologies in particular for the space, for the tech space. And so like I'm looking, how can we use NFTs to maintain ownership of sexual content, and kind of bypass like pimps and content creator conglomerates. How can I use my NFT to monetize, my body, and get all of the benefit back? How do we build communities for sexuality, using NFTs as like an intro pass? Um, so that's kind of where I'm the most curious about. But I'm also really fascinated with DAOs, which are, I guess, like distributed autonomous organizations. So what you can do with a DAO is you can create a series of rules and regulations that are immediately like enacted on chain, like on the blockchain, and allow for communities to form. And you can use tokens to create voting rights and create these little communities, etc. And so I'm like, well, what if we could build a DAO for, content creators, or a DAO for sex education, thinking about what people want to learn. So I don't know. I'm still exploring actually, and I'm still in the beginning of my education journey. I'm starting to get a hang of how the technologies work, but I'm still a bit early. But I do think it could be an interesting solution to the ownership problem and the finance problem, right? because if you can use like tokenomics or something like this to get paid your money and not have to rely on, the fintechs, like the traditional fintechs, because crypto is also in the margin. Um, Maybe that could be a way around all of the barriers.
Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to subscribe to our newsletter, shop the latest digital health products, or listen to more episodes, please go to www.digitalhealthreview.com.